I'll use it anyway. Can I go? Okay. Ta-da! Welcome to the talk. This is my son behind me. Virtually, this is his normal expression when I give talks. So, wow, it is really just like most of you have probably heard this rant before. So we can just have a conversation if you like. How many people haven't heard me rant about the hacker culture in the past? You are lying. I know that for a fact. You're just trying to make me feel good. So somebody else, I think it's the guy in that room, was upset that he was speaking up against me, and I told him we were going to go on a field trip because I thought the room would like be packed full of people, and it's not. So stay here. Don't go next door. All right, so I'm going to talk about the hacker community and my view of it. A few things I want to preface with that. One, I've been doing this is computer security-like stuff for about 20 years now, which is kind of a long time, maybe not as long time as some of the old men of the industry. We'll get to you in a second, sir. And I've seen a lot of things change, and it's been interesting to watch the evolution of the security industry, because this is what I do for fun, this is what I do for business, this is my family business. My kids have been entrenched in the hacker community and the scene since they were born. And, you know, due to the changes that we've seen, I think we've lost a lot of good characteristics that we've had in the community that we haven't really realized we've lost. So what I want to do today is talk about some specific things, characteristics of the hacker community that have changed over the last 2 decades, and talk about how we can maybe not regain them and at least compensate for the changes that have occurred. It's very easy to get up on stage and rant about the old times and hold on, I'll get to it in a second. Oop, there you go. There it was. And be the crotchety old guy. Yeah, you do in my Photoshop universe. You are Clint Eastwood, I hope you realize that. That's whose body that is, which is a mite bit better than the one that you own. So, yeah. It's really easy to get up and rant and talk about how everything's changed and get off my lawn, you punk kids, and all that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, like, if you can't carry forward and do something productive with that and have something that's actually tangible that you as an individual can act on when you leave this place, it's just kind of informative comedy. You know, it's not really something that I think is all that pragmatic. I'm a consultant by trade, so I like to distill things down. When you brief out like executives, you have to distill it down to like 3 boxes and a couple of words, and the CEO will be like, oh yeah, I understand that, because they're not going to take the time to understand super complex problems. I have 50 minutes here to instill onto you what I feel is a super complex problem, so I'm going to try to distill down the changes in the hacker community into 3 primary areas. But before we get to that, I'm going to go backwards. I used to start all my talks with this very simple statement, which is that you shouldn't believe anything that I say. And I still encourage you not to believe anything that I say. I didn't do any kind of intro. You really don't know who I am short of what is in the bio and the page. I've dropped out of school in Fairbanks, Alaska. Anyone ever go to school in Fairbanks, Alaska? Besides my wife, or I met her there. So it's funny because I'll ask that question, and out of like 1,000 people, like 1 person will raise their hand, and then I'll ask the follow-on question, has anyone graduated from the University of Alaska Fairbanks? And the hands go down. I've met 1 person ever who's graduated from that school that attended. So it's a fine school. If you want your children to learn a rough lesson in life, it's a good place to send them to. So that said, I think there's a greater altruism or greater directive here that we need to think about given kind of the current state of the industry. So the industry, it continues to evolve. It continues to draw people in. People continue to do research and make all kinds of claims, and you have to hold yourself accountable at the very least for whether or not you believe what you're hearing from the press, from presenters, from your coworkers, from your network, your sensors, whatever. But the secondary thing is you need to hold other people accountable. If you think what they're saying is bullshit, you should call them out. And it's hard. Like, I say this all the time. Like, I say, you need to call out badness, you need to call out bullshit. For ShmooCon, we arm everyone with squishy foam rubber balls, and we encourage them to throw them in the speaker if you disagree. And that's our form of discourse. And it's cute and it's funny, and sometimes we actually have honest conversation. But there are times when the honest conversation is hard, when we all know we're disagreeing on something. We all look at each other, and no one says anything because it's difficult. And I think we're at that kind of crossroad in our industry right now where there's pervasive badness, pervasive bad things happening, where we know we're doing wrong things. We know we're getting a line of shit, and we're continuing to believe it. So in your day-to-day life, I encourage you to hold others accountable as best you can. And it's awkward and painful, but you should. Something else I've heard this weekend that I wanted to call about. There's an odd amount of absolute statements that get spoken from these stages. People will say, we always, or we never, or businesses don't care, or businesses do this, or whatever. First of all, you can't stereotype any group like that, right? Like, we certainly shouldn't take as gospel that, I've heard this statement a couple times this weekend, businesses don't care about security. Businesses care about security potentially in the wrong way, right? Businesses are risk management machines. That's all they are, right? A business's job is to make money in their primary business area and to manage risks that impede on their ability to make that money. I mean, there's secondary things, do good, whatever the hell else they're supposed to do. It's capitalism. Come on, Christ. Everyone's trying to make a buck. And the executives in large businesses do nothing but manage risk. If they don't care about security in the same way that you care about security, one of two things has occurred. One, you are not communicating the risk effectively of what's wrong in the enterprise. If you write a pen test report and people are like, well, that was bullshit, I'm throw it on the floor, I can't believe they did that. There's so many goddamn holes. Well, you probably didn't really drive home the purpose of the report. You didn't drive home the findings that you had in a way that was meaningful to them. And maybe it's a problem with the report. Maybe it's a problem with the whole premise of why you pen test. We can get on that if you want. But at the end of the day, I think that either they're misholding risk and you need to describe it better, or you're holding it wrong and you need to get off your high horse and think that security is some absolute thing that everybody needs to care about all the time. Because it was pointed out yesterday, Target gets popped, Sony gets popped, Home Depot gets popped. For most of these organizations, it's the cost of doing business, right? Hey, Space Road, what was the stat? $137 million that Target lost? Yeah, it's in the noise. Banks get robbed all the time. They don't cry about it when it happens. They expect it. They have financial models that account for getting robbed, both physically and virtually. There's loss in the system, and they've learned to deal with it. So when you say things like businesses don't care about security, I've spent a lot of time in boardrooms. I spent a lot of time with executives. And the one thing that I hear when I hear that statement is you are out of touch of the way people are thinking about security and how they hold that risk. That makes sense? This has nothing to do with my talk, by the way, to be clear. Like, I've not actually touched the hacker culture. I just had a soapbox. You let me on stage, and this is the shit that's going to happen. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Anyway, I'm happy to talk about this in more detail later on, but I get personally very aggravated, and my blood pressure goes up many points when I come to an event like this and I hear these things being said on stage. And at the end of the day, I know personally, I try not to railroad shit. Like, I don't want to stand up in the middle of a talk and be like, that's bullshit, because I have a long history of being an asshole and doing that kind of thing, and I really don't like doing it. And I would much prefer, like, if someone else stood up and said, that's bullshit, I will put you on my shoulder. Thank you! I was going to say I'll put you on my shoulders and run you around, but I don't know that that's really a thing I would do with you, sir. So, yeah, I'm a little out of shape. Anyway, I think what you'll find is this community is very accepting and very supportive. And when it comes to trying to deal with hard problems, we will be supportive. We will be awkward. We will dance like junior high students, I assure you. Like, when we try to have difficult discussions in this community, it gets awkward in a hurry, but it's super important. Because the more we pretend that it's all just one big kumbaya, everybody's on the same page thing, the worse we make it for ourselves. So we really have to challenge ourselves and challenge each other. Anyway. Back to Space Rogue. Once was enough. Well, I had you walked right into it, so I had to go with it. I use actual Photoshop for this too. Look at the quality of this. Yeah, exactly. Snip, 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 snip. It's actually really hard to do with a trackpad. Like, that was one thing. The first three of them, you had like a halo, and one time I missed your ear. And anyway, I don't want to be the crotchety old guy, because again, like, I think I already fulfilled that role, and so I'm trying to provide some kind of progressive view of how the community has changed. And I think it's important that we learn from the past in order to make the future better. Now, these are two very interesting examples of shit gone off the rails that I think we can learn from, okay? In the upper left is Gobbles. Anyone remember Gobbles? A handful of people. So Gobbles, I'll do the abbreviated version of this, I think was a performance art experiment gone awry. There were a group of hackers, some of them publicly seen here at DEF CON, some of them working behind the scenes. It's a very complex story, all things being equal. Gobbles dropped O'Day in OpenSSH, I guess, was the first one they dropped. And this is like DEF CON 10, 9, somewhere in that realm. And they got like on some mailing list, so like, bam, here's OpenSSH O'Day, and made Theo, the guy who maintains OpenBSD, super duper angry. Because Theo was like, OpenBSD is the most secure thing in the world, and no one can touch it. And these kids came on and dropped this O'Day. And so Theo uncorks it on the mailing list. Everybody gets up in arms, and these guys just start trolling people. Like, just offensive, crazy responses to emails. And you're like, how do these guys who can't even really form complete sentences and appear to be professional trolls develop a relatively sophisticated attack? Nobody knows. This kind of stirs around for a while. Eventually, they kind of like, oh, yeah, we're just screwing around. We stole it from somebody's box, whatever. And the next day, they drop, bam, here's another O'Day and like OpenSSL or some other equally sophisticated thing. And we're all like, all right, I totally don't understand what's going on anymore. Like, really good. And some of the exploit techniques they had were pretty novel at the time. And they were just acting like children. And so then they submit a talk to DEF CON, and we're like, Gobbles speaks. And it's basically the name of the talk. So they're going to get up and they're going to talk. Everybody's wondering who these guys are because we've only seen them on Bug Track. Like, nobody knows who they are. These kids show up, these guys, at DEF CON at the Alexis Park. And like, the one dude in the middle there is like practicing his own version of a martial art and like encouraging all comers to fight him while he's standing around the pool before his talk. The guy on the left is the Unix terrorist. That guy went to jail years later for carding, like living the proper gangster gangster hacker lifestyle. He got busted with hookers blow, wads of cash, and sports cars from carding. Like, yeah, seriously, like Miami Beach, it wasn't Buckney, he was wearing like jorts and like steroids, and like that was his thing. Like, seriously, there's like a New Yorker, somebody did an article on it. It's amazing, that guy's life. And so they got up there, and it was just like, they were just like grabbing the mic from each other, like, fuck the man. You're like, what is going on? And they kind of like disappeared into the history of I'm telling the story in a very roundabout way. You could go back and read all the posts, and it was really amazing. But it was one of those times when I think the hacker community had kind of thought they were growing up, and there was a lot of InfoSec professionals, and they watched this stuff go down, and people were like, I don't understand. You know, I think that's a valuable moment. This one down here, Venom, so that was what, the VM vulnerability through the floppy driver on QEMU? It was QEMU, right? Who here used QEMU in a production environment? What? All right, look at the risk. But we registered a domain. You know, QEMU, oh God, it's a terrible vulnerability. I'm like, if we actually use QEMU, it would be a horrific vulnerability, but no one does. See, right, but look at the graphic, man. It must be a serious thing. So the marketing departments are all in front of these vulnerabilities now, checking you have to check to see if the domain's available before you name the vulnerability, right? Like, you laugh, but this is the thing. You know there are people like, what should we call it? Venom. Venom.com is taken. What about venom.crowdstrike.com? Oh, yeah, whoa, hey, we can control that, and that's what they did. So anyway, I think there's a lot to learn from the way we handle vulnerabilities today. First, I want to draw a few battle lines. I believe, boldly, and with almost no reference, or... Did I say that? Yeah, no, it's on. There's very little research to back up what I'm about to say, so you can feel free to disagree. I believe we're at the dawn of the 4th generation of hackers. All right, so I've drawn the lines as thus. The 1st generation, before the September that never ended, the eternal September. Who here was on the internet before September 1993? Wow, we are old. Like, that's actually a lot. That's a lot of people. The guy with the white hair in the back raised his hand, unsurprisingly. Like, hey, what's up? When did you first get online, sir? 88. Well, I was in 7th grade, so, and playing Scorched Earth. Woohoo! Scorched Earth. Anyone? Yeah, a few people. That got wicked hard as the clock speeds got up, right? Because it was all tied to the clock speed, so you pay that at 46, 66, and the tank turret would just spin around. Anyway. So there was this kind of universe of people that existed in a connected world prior to September 1993. And they started out phone freaking, and it evolved into BBSs, and it evolved into, as Space Rogue likes to point out, mail and FTP, and kind of the pre-web internet, pre-September 1993 internet. To be super clear, I got on the internet in September of 1993. I was part of the problem, and I still am living with the legacy of being part of that problem. So the issue, for those that don't know, is every September, Usenet would be flooded by kids going to school, getting online, and not having any idea of what netiquette is. They would not play nice, they wouldn't use the right terms, they would post in all caps, they would top post, they would do all this stuff that annoyed all the Usenet users. And so every September, the Usenet admins would have to be like, look, calm down, take the caps lock key off, please speak with respect, stop being a jerk. And then by October, November, things would calm down. And then next September, this spike would get a little worse. It would take a little longer to calm down. September of 1993, basically the start of .com, start of the web, Mosaic was released, and that was the end of Usenet, being a productive member of society, and the internet was overrun by the masses, right? And so everything that happened until then, from a hacking perspective, was very much a closed-knit group of people who worked in, I would say, kind of dark corners, but only dark because there weren't a lot of people around. And they knew each other through handles, they knew each other through direct relationships that they had formed, and the kind of legend of their own actions, right? Back when you could have hackers that had lore around them. Man, that guy broke into Pac Bell and did something, I don't know, whatever you used to do to phone switches, I forget. Like, I guess you could do things to them. You whistled into them to make the missiles go. That seems to be the running joke. The second generation, I think, is kind of the heyday of the hacking group, right? And some of these groups, like the Loft started in 90, 89, 92. CDC, Call to the Dead Cow, started in like 88 or 86 or something, and they were freaking and getting their BBS on early. Woo Woo started up actually kind of late in the scene, and they had like 1 billion members. I think it was just kind of there was a lot of social weirdness going on in Woo Woo, but I mean that to all respect to all the Woo Woo members who are now like, they all claim to be billionaires. It's kind of funny. Anyway, there was a lot of, you went from these kind of individual lore to the lore of the groups. You know, like you guys were kings, right? Well, you were. I mean, the Loft was like, they were the granddaddy. CDC were the Hellraisers. Like, you went to DEF CON, and like, I remember when I was starting to get into the scene, I'm like, man, those CDC guys are nuts. And they were actually nuts. Like, there were some crazy, scary guys and gals that were involved in CDC. And this culture is what permeated. And it was very edgy, but it was also very progressive, and a lot of shit got done. You know, CDC, they released Back Orifice, and that was an administration tool, and a tool that wrote a really weird line because people actually used this backdoor as an admin capability, but also like all the AV would flag it. And from CDC's perspective, they very happily found that seam between this tool can be used equally for good and bad, and let's have discourse around it. I don't believe they sat around and used the term, let's have discourse around this. To be clear, but there was an actual conversation that occurred due to their actions, due to the actions of Loft, due to the actions of Woo and people like that. 2003, 2002 kind of time frames, the worms hit, right? And we get Code Red, we get NIMDA, we get all this other stuff. Thank God I wasn't responsible for a network during that time. I could just kick back and watch, like, hey, the world burned down yesterday. That was awesome. Code Red was particularly great. I mean, those things moved with speed around the internet. Very good propagation. And people started to realize, like, man, this is big business, right? Like, I can get a lot of money and a lot of notoriety getting into security. And so we have this kind of, the InfoSec scene, rather than the hacker scene, I think really emerged in this third generation, where defense contractors took the polos off and put on black t-shirts and called themselves hackers. You know, all the kids were trying to call themselves hackers. The old school hackers went off and got respectable jobs, which is all kinds of weird. And then that all kind of evolved into a, weird, well, I'll say creation of mediocreness in the middle, and then all of a sudden there was this big set of leaks. We got WikiLeaks, and we got Manning, we got Snowden, all these things happened where people stole information because, man, I have access to tons of information, and I disagree with you, and so I'm just going to do this. Individual actors had all this power all of a sudden. It wasn't just, I'm popping a website. It's, I can affect nation-state level activity as an individual with access. And it was a very different problem to have. And I think it's interesting because the original social and kind of technical reasons that the hacking scene started with are partially carried forward in these ideas of leaking. But I think the consciousness and ethics involved in the early hacking scene about why am I doing this, is this the right thing for the purpose that I'm doing, have largely been abandoned in the face of now what is kind of a cult of personality around a handful of people who have affected large-scale change for right or wrong. And I have trouble with that because I don't like people in general. I'm fairly antisocial, and I really don't like authority. And I don't like people telling me who I should idolize and who I should have respect for if I haven't had proper time to talk, to have discourse, and whatever. And when I see a group of people idolizing and canonizing individuals without much public debate as to whether or not it was a good thing, they're just going to blindly follow, I will push back against that all day long just to force everyone to speak about it. So you may agree or disagree with Snowden, with Manning, with Prof. Assange. You know, Julian Assange, what was his handle before? I just gave it to you. It's Prof. What did he write? Nothing. Come on. He wrote Strobe. It was a precursor to Nmap. It was the preeminent freaking scanning tool on the internet before Nmap exists. It was written by Prof. You can still go download it. Boop, by Prof. That's Julian Assange. So when you say, like, he was a hacker in the past, like, he actually did stuff like that. And now he just, like, hangs out with the Ecuadorians, I guess. So, they're nice people. What? He doesn't leave the building. I thought maybe it's just the Assange hologram, and he's actually been ascended to Xenu or something. So anyway, the next generation is that's my toes. I have for those in the front row, I get, hello, these are my toes. Gets a little weird after a while up here. I'm keeping my shoes on, though. Normally I take them off. So the fourth generation is where I think we are now, which is hacking in big business, and you know all the named exploits and all that kind of thing. And it's a very different time. I don't know how this is going to play out yet, but there used to be a couple of hacker cons. They were kind of not exclusive, but not a lot of people went to them. They were edgy. You know, we feared the press. We didn't like the feds, whatever. I have a sneaking suspicion half of you either are the man or work for the man, so we don't really qualify as a HackerCon, right? ShmooCon doesn't qualify as a HackerCon. DEF CON doesn't qualify as a HackerCon. 2 years ago, after the Snowden drop, and DT got up and said, hey, the feds should maybe take a break from coming to DEF CON. Like, okay, that's like half the people that go to DEF CON, first of all, if you look at the feds directly and all the people paid for by the feds. Secondly, isn't your paycheck come from DHS through ICANN? So aren't you technically the man also, Jeff? Just saying. I'm glad that's on tape. And people showed up, and we all still party, woo, woo, by the pool with big sponsorship and everything. So I think we're in a point where my basic premise is money changes everything. So this is some random graph about the size of the information security industry over some random period, including the future, that someone made up. But it's... Thank you. I am here to serve. I did hear on the ride out here, the latest kind of estimation of the size of the security industry is $70 billion. So I'm going to call that big, right? That's not ginormous. It's not huge, but it's pretty damn big. And that's just the mainline security industry, not all the downstream things that are affected by it. Oh, God. Excuse me. Wow, that went right down my throat. Anyway, so, yeah, I don't really know. But my premise is all this money's flowing in, and it's very hard to work against this amount of cash that flows in the security industry. And when it comes to the hacker community, the original hacker ethos, which I'll get to in a minute, it's very hard to fight against a $70 billion and growing industry. So what are the things that we've lost? My first point is altruism in the greater good. As much as there was a lot of kind of damn the man, rebelling against the machine, whatever the hell you want to call it, there was always an undercurrent of the greater good for the most part in the hacker community. Again, I don't want to use absolutes, but when I think about why I got involved in this scene and why a number of people I know got involved, it was because they were trying to make a difference, right? And how are they define difference? Like, I care about things differently, you care about things differently, you care about things, but at the end of the day, like, we got involved in this because we thought, man, there's some really lousy crap here. We want to know how it works. We want to figure out how to make it better. We're curious. We want to be productive in our own definition of the word productive. And one of the interesting things that came out of this was this idea that at HackerCons and events like this, there shall be no product pitches. Like, you can't get up on stage and shill a firewall or antivirus. And in fact, if you slag on those products, you are declared a god, right? Like, I tore apart firewalls, I tore apart antivirus. Like, oh, that's so awesome that you did that. Meanwhile, in the hallway is McAfee and Symantec and everybody else paying our freight to come here to allow us to get on stage and slag on all these products. So, like, that's an odd dichotomy, but it seems to carry on and work. That's really cool. No product pitches because then you're a trade show. Well, it's already a trade show. It's just not about product. So here's the deal. When you think about the universe of shit that we get, we have products and services. If it's not one of those two things, it largely doesn't exist as something that I can exchange cash for in exchange of. So there's free things, and there's things that I pay for, and there's products and services. And hopefully you can agree, this largely is the view of the entire known universe. Bitcoin. Shush. I don't even have like a snarky comeback of where that would be. So I thought about, in general, what are the types of things that fit into the universe from a security perspective. So we've got open source tools. I got, SIMs and firewalls. We have consulting companies. We have the EFF and people like that providing, free services. I mean, you can read. I'm not going to go through each of these points. At the end of the day, when you come to these conferences, we've come to believe that the things on top, because they're free, are okay to talk about and okay to get up on stage. And the things on the bottom are bad. You shouldn't talk about them unless you're destroying them, right? What's interesting, because a lot of this stuff goes to the middle, and ultimately the development of all these free widgets and open source software and open source threat information and the vulnerability research is done by people working for services companies, right? They work for a big consulting company, or they've hung out their own shingle, or there's a startup with 15 guys in it, and they're doing cool stuff. I assure you, those people get business by the virtue of the presentations that they do. They may not get on stage and say, my hourly rate is $250 an hour, and I do vulnerability research. But the second part of that sentence is clearly stated, and their bio says they work for a consulting company. I bet they'll do work for you if you give them money, right? So security conferences, in their current form, by and large, are just trade shows for services companies. Head nodding. Anyone disagree with this? Okay, good. This should be like the emperor has no clothes in some regard. I don't think it's that groundbreaking, but for those of you who've been in the scene a while, it hopefully rings true. For those of you that don't, I apologize for my soapbox, because this probably makes no sense whatsoever. There's a lot of history that I'm assuming that you are aware of, and it's very difficult. I was talking to Space Rogue about this yesterday. I keep dropping his name in hopes that I can become somewhat well-known and famous and cool, so I'm just going to keep referencing my conversations with Space Rogue. No, whoa! Holy shit, sir, you have stepped in it. To be clear, Heidi runs ShmooCon. So, wow. They're gonna come up on stage and do UFC 193 right now. So what do? We can accept that money is the motivator for services in a huge part of the market. I think you have to, right? And I think the subtext of that is we probably have to start accepting product vendors on a more equal footing than we have. We can't demonize products. We use them all the time, as it turns out. You don't get to use firewalls as a service that a person does. Like, you have to buy the equipment. You have to buy the IDAM solution and the MDM and all these things with poo-poo. But at the end of the day, like, let's make them better. Let's be better people with them. So can we hold the selection committees and the journalists and the bloggers and Twitter people to a higher standard to call out self-serving research? No, because it's all self-serving research, right? Like, I do services for a living. I'm a consultant. I know that when I get up on stage and ran around, people will come up to me afterwards and be like, hey, who do you work for? Can I call you up? Can I have a contract? I mean, I recruit. I do all these things. And I'm up here, like, saying everything's ugly and we're doing it all wrong. Think of the people who aren't, right? They make bank when they get up here. So what's important? Really, I think the issue afoot is there are gaps in the industry and gaps in what we're doing because people are going to get up on stage and talk about what's sexy and cool and not necessarily about what needs to get done, right? This has been pointed out several times this weekend that there are just foundational issues with how we think about computer security, how we think about defending our networks, that really we have just come to accept. And was it you that made the point that users should just be able to do like whatever the hell they want to do? Like, I'm a firm believer, like, hallelujah. Users should be as stupid as you let them be, and they shouldn't be, nothing bad should happen to your network, right? Period. It's not their job. Their job is to be in the finance department or sell things or be a developer. Their primary job isn't to do security. So we need to build products that facilitates them doing their job in a secure fashion without them having to do anything. And that's a very weird mindset to get people into. The problem is the tools just don't exist. Developers at Google, at Microsoft, at Oracle, whatever, can't even write secure code. They try really hard, and they have big institutional, maybe not Oracle, but the rest of them have big institutional investments in trying to actually write secure code, and there's still vulnerabilities. If Google and Microsoft can't write secure code, your average person in your web development shop for your own company has absolutely no chance of getting it right. Why? Because the tools they have are super dangerous. C, we live with it every day. It's a fantastically dangerous language. We should know how to write C securely, to have compilers that enforce security, to understand how to stop vulnerabilities. We don't. And I was very frank, I put the onus for this problem squarely on the doorstep of DARPA. So DARPA, for a number of years, and NSF as well, spent a lot of time and money investing in foundational software security issues. How do we think about running securely at a very low level, languages, processors that can make a difference? 9/11 happened, and DARPA got all kinetic and counter intel and terrorist, right? That was their focus, and they dropped the ball hard on foundational computer security stuff. I got invited to speak at the DARPA Cyber Colloquium, I guess it was like 4 years ago now, and it was like General Alexander, General Hernandez, whoever the general in the Marine Corps, Richard Clark, and me. This is a serious thing on stage, and I got to give a 15-minute talk about my view of the research direction that DARPA needed to take. And I spent the first 5 minutes just describing how DARPA had dropped the ball in the last decade. And the director came up to me afterwards, and I thought for sure it was going to be like a, hey, thanks, you should never come here again. And she was like ecstatic. She's like, thank you so much for saying that. I have a lot of respect for Director Dugan. She's now at Google. But she was like, absolutely, what? Okay, it's funny. In some ways it's funny. I think she took it to heart. Mudge was at DARPA at the time. He was obviously trying to make a difference. And I think DARPA, by and large, now is trying to do good things, but there is a gap. And during that gap, the internet grew dramatically. And not only did we not scale up our research in this space, we scaled it down. And I think it's terrifying. So NSF, DARPA, other organizations, they're trying to do what's right, but they also had their own target. What's the D in DARPA? Right, it's defense. They're going to do what's right for defense of the country and everybody else. I mean, they do good work, but there's while there's altruism, there's also defense involved, right? If we look at the altruistic nature of research, we look for people like NSF. It's very hard to get research dollars for NSF when you're an individual security researcher doing your own thing in your spare time. Like, I've written grant requests, I've gotten DARPA research, I've gotten research from other government organizations. It's hard work. And actually, the work that we did for DARPA on one of our research programs, Mudge used as one of 4 case examples when he went to Congress to get money for the cyber fast track program. And I was like, thanks for using us as a guinea pig. Maybe you could have told us that, like, why this was so painful. I think the hacker community needs its own kind of self-funded, self-directed idea of what needs to happen next. You know, we should do something like the trustworthy computing plan from the White House. From our view, ignorant of nation state, what's important? And then further, how does it get funded, right? Do we crowdsource this thing? Do we ask for, hey, all the hacker conferences, can you pay a 5% tax to a fund that's held by like a nonprofit that can help go try to get people to do the right thing and compensate researchers? Can we go to the big companies and ask for grants? What are the gaps that are important? I don't stand up here claiming to know what the gaps are. This report, Trustworthy Computing Plan, is actually a pretty interesting start. If you haven't read it, this one's a little old, but it's something that periodically NSF and the White House do these studies, and there's great knowledge to be had in these. If you haven't read these reports, you're really not up to date of the state of the industry, because these are the identified gaps by some of the biggest names. People like Peter Neumann and Dan Geer, who have been doing this longer than I've been alive, let alone sitting at a keyboard. I have a lot of respect for them. Anyway, I'm running out of time, so I'm going to cruise. Edginess. That's the second thing we lost. We used to be edgy. I used to go to DEF CON and come home after seeing things that there was no way that I could tell my children that I saw. That has not happened in a few years. Sheep, yeah, this is even crazier stuff than sheep. Pull2girl.com doesn't even exist anymore. Yeah, somebody let it lapse. It's hard to, someone's like, I'm going to go register that right now. Also, why is it goatsy and not goat sex? That's what I always, like, shouldn't it be pronounced? Is it a typo? Is that really, do you know the etymology of? I've wondered this a lot, but I don't want to tweet that one. Yeah, like, somebody just, yeah, no, Googling, why is it not goatsy and not goat sex? I am not Googling any of that statement. That will all end horrifically. So, I believe edginess is disruption, and disruption is good, right? Because without this disruption, we fall to the center, and we become complacent. And if you look, even at DEF CON, I use DEF CON as a surrogate for the industry, or for the community. You got DJ Keith Myers running around, digging up his own albums by the side of Pool 2 at the Alexis Park at like an impromptu party where people would just go to the mini mart down the road, buy a bunch of beer, sit around and drink, oonce all night long, do whatever the hell you want, inflatable sheep everywhere. It was a grand old time. Now we have Freak Show, sponsored by Active and Still Secure, and there's like paid actors there and a wristband and all kinds of stuff, and it's super formal and all done up, and there's posters and commemorative t-shirts and your pint glass and a photo booth and Instagram and woohoo! Like, aren't I edgy? Like, if it's on Instagram, you're not edgy. Like, guaranteed. There should always be something in frame that is no, that's against Instagram's policy. Like, that's how, anyway. It's a little bit like the French and the British, right? So, let's take colonial warfare as an example. We used to politely stand across a line from each other and shoot, and not a lot of people died, right? Why? Well, we didn't have automatic weapons. The weapons we had didn't have high muzzle velocity. They were a pain in the ass to load. You know, in general, people had a fairly low tolerance for losing their own folks. A few people went down. They got injured gravely. You drugged them off. You had some tea and crumpets, and you thought about, what will we do to the French tomorrow? I guess the French and English fought at some point. I don't really know my history. I presume that's who's fighting here. So, they're playing softball. It's the French and English softball league. Like, what's the size of the muskets they had, right? With the big elephant thing on the end. Anyway, then things changed. We developed better weapons. We figured out how to rifle. We figured out how to reload faster. There was advances in warfare and technique that caused warfare to change over time. And warfare has continued to evolve. And that edginess of like, hey, I know how to build a better bullet. Hey, I know how to build a better gun. And now when the French stand across from us, we British can just lay waste to them. And then when the British come over here with their fancy weapons, and we decide to do impolite things like stand behind trees. Now, this is an area I take a little bit of an exception with, because I do believe that prior to the colonials and the revolutionaries, there were probably people standing behind trees in warfare. Just from a common sense perspective, I like to think that people weren't like, oh, it's wartime, I should stand in the open. Like, self-preservation went out the goddamn window when you put the uniform on. I don't believe that to be true, but that's what we teach our kids in school. That, hey, the American revolutionaries are smart. They stood behind trees. You're like, what? If that's the border, like, that's the bar for smart, like, there must be really dumb people sitting around. They're standing behind sheep. That's New Zealand versus Australia, sir. That's the World Cup. I don't understand soccer, but I think it involves sheep, because it doesn't involve scoring. There's like no soccer fans in the room to even groan at that. That was awesome. Yeah. Making soccer jokes. So there's a bit of an analog in our space where we had, this is 1994, this guy goes and he steals $10 million from Citibanks and has the common sense to route it around the world through different banks, but he didn't have the common sense to not use his own laptop, his work laptop, to do all the hacking, right? This was state-of-the-art and one of the largest pieces of online crime in 1994. Okay? Since 1994, times have changed, right? We have built weaponized exploit kits, IHAZ Metasploit. We have a lot more sophistication in vulnerability research. Vulnerability research has gotten a lot different. It's not just stack smashing, right? I don't just overwrite the return and put a bunch of crap on there, like I gotta go build ROP gadgets and figure out what version of the libraries you have and do all kinds of nonsense. That's a lot more complicated than it was when AL1 released Stashing the Smack back in '96, right? Dramatically different landscape. We have the anonymity service. Tor's like a thing that mortals can use. You just download the Tor bundle and use it. Click. You can buy, getting looked at. Basically, like, look, I'm broad brushstrokes here. I can't dive into this crap. There's secondary markets that are selling vulnerabilities. And so in 2014, we have things like Bitcoin, which then leads to Bitcoin theft, which is so unbelievably complicated that no one's really sure where $500 million went. That's a lot different than one Russian dude using his laptop to hack Citibank with effectively a big red flag standing in the middle of the field going, hi, I'm a Brit, you're a French guy, you should shoot me, right? This is standing behind trees, and we're just getting started. This is only 30 or 40 years old. This warfare is going to get a lot more complicated. This is edginess, right? Bitcoin's edgy. All the hipsters pay for their weed in it. Sorry. I am going to reserve my thoughts on Bitcoin, I guess would be the best way to do that right now. It's not softball. Bitcoin is not softball. In fact, it is actually a cryptographically assured ledger of all the stupid things you've done. So when you buy drugs on it and the feds find your Bitcoin address on your laptop, oops, like that's it. There's no other forensic evidence necessary. Like, unless you believe that all modern day crypto is broken and Bitcoin is just pretend, you're done. And at the end of the day, I do think Bitcoin is just pretend, but I don't think modern day crypto is broken. Therefore, you are cryptographically bound to your crime for all time. Good job, thief. Do you feel better now? No, I'm just really getting warmed up. So I think disruption is important. I think the edginess is important because it fosters innovation. At the end of the day, money removes entropy from the system. When we get paid to do what we do, we don't take risks, period. There are things I'm not saying now because I know I probably shouldn't, my employer, my client, or somebody wouldn't like it. I actually have an employer now. I used to work for myself for years, and now I actually have a job where I report to someone, and it's weird, and I have to like self-censor, and I don't like it. And I know a lot of people self-censor. Yeah, this is me self-censoring, by the way. You see what the throttle's like totally off. Individuals become risk-averse. Individuals form organizations. Those organizations become risk-averse, and risk aversion leads to less innovation, less edginess, less disruption. Disruption gets in the way of the bottom line. Now, innovation doesn't, but I'm not talking about innovation like developing the next Twitter or something like that. I'm talking about an environment in the hacker community, in the security community, where things change every day. The rules of the game change every day, and innovation comes in the form of new types of exploits, new threat actors, new defensive technologies that nobody ever thought of before, but some guy just programmed it over in his basement, presented it at some regional con, and suddenly it's a big deal, right? You look at like the history of Bro. Look at what Liam and crew have done with Bro over the years. I mean, Bro is a little tiny thing, had some government funding, you know, whatever, a little nascent thing, and it's incredibly useful. Like, it's an amazing tool, right? It didn't come from like mainline development. You know, Checkpoint or Cisco or whoever didn't develop Bro and like pitch it through a bunch of stuff. Just people who knew security decided to try to do it right. And it's a pretty neat little tool. Little tool, it's huge now. So what can you do? Again, trying to give you takeaways here. Foster the edginess, right? Whatever you can do to encourage bad behavior. And I don't mean like within walls. I'm like, just fuck shit up. Like, at the end of the day, like, I am a big fan of that. I'm a big fan of just causing chaos for chaos's sake, which sounds idiotic, and I'll be honest, but I will change things in my own life and at my business just because they're going well. Like, oh, this is going well, let's do it differently. Let's learn. Because we're on autopilot going forward, we're not learning. There are times when maybe you don't want to do that, but in general, I would encourage you to do that. Also, you should donate to the EFF because they protect our rights to be edgy and bad behavior and all that kind of stuff. Go EFF. I am almost out of time, so I'm going to run through the next one. You all familiar with this concept? Boiling of the frog. So, respect to paranoia, I believe we are the frog that is being slowly boiled. That said, here's an interesting side note. When I went to cut and paste this graphic off of Wikipedia, which is actually when I Googled boiling frog, like Wikipedia was the first thing. I'm like, sweet. And I went to grab it. When I hit Control-C, this dialog popped up and said, hey, here's how you download the original file and cite the author. First of all, the fact that they intercepted Control-C with JavaScript was slightly scary. Like, I'm just going to go right out there and say, I didn't like that shit at all. But it was amazingly useful and compelling. And I thought, I haven't cited anything in this presentation yet. Maybe I should cite something. Why? They made it compelling for me. Security should have the same characteristic. It should be compelling to use. You shouldn't use it because you have to. You should use it because it makes your life easier. The development shops that I've worked in, where we've helped people do security right, we have built libraries and middleware and things that were compelling for them to use from a business perspective. Use this library to do all your database lookups. By the way, coincidentally, it enforces role-based authentication, access delegation through the tiers, all kinds of things. You don't even know about it. Just use it. They're like, wow, this thing's easy to use. And it's secure. It's like a Saturday morning cereal commercial. It's awesome. And they would use it, and it was awesome, but only because it was compelling, right? And it was part of your complete breakfast. Damn right. Also, anyone here play Galaga? So I was at 198,000 points last night. I don't know if anybody beat me yet, but I'm actually like having like freaking like cramps and things in my right arm because I played for so long, and it's hurting to hold the mic. So I'm gonna have to switch. And this is actually an embarrassment. Like, my hand is actually like going crazy from holding the microphone and playing too much Galaga. So also. What you? Yeah, you definitely. Yeah, thank you, sir. Wasn't Gallagher. It was most certainly. Spiky saw it. Spiky was there watching me. Yeah. Anyway. Back to the story. All right. So I only have a few minutes here, so I wanted to just bomb through it. Hacker privacy in 1995. Always use a handle. Space Rogue still uses handle in 2015. And he is one of the few people that has held on to that religious, like, you know, I'm going to use my handle at all costs. Some of us know his real name, but not many do, and it's actually pretty hard to figure out. But he laid that groundwork a long time ago before Facebook or anything existed. Like, that was back when he was on IRC or, I don't know, Cuneiform and tablets. I don't know how old you are. Like, Cuneiform, yeah, it went weird places for that one. We use public connections. Is there a black van in front of my house? Because all hackers are like super paranoid. They're going to get vanned at any moment. Like, there's only so many FBI agents that actually gave a shit. And they were all out getting Mitnick anyway, so it didn't matter. So at the time, though, there was a very small attack surface, right? Like, you didn't have a lot of information online. There wasn't huge publicly accessible databases. Your county didn't have the tax records and housing records online. You had to go to the courthouse. If you wanted to go troll someone to go to the courthouse, like, it was a lot of work. If they were in Colorado and you were in Maine, like, that's some trolling dedication there. Like, oh, I'm going to go to Colorado and, like, go to the courthouse. At that point, it's stalking. Like, you're straight up going to commit a felony. It's not a felony. Just look it up online now. It's not really that big of a deal to post it on Twitter. Twitter may take it down, but it's amazing how much private information about people that you can post online. It's totally legal because the county did it before you. Hacker Privacy Circa 2015. How many of you use Facebook every day? Every day. Wow, that's actually a shockingly small number. I am impressed. Gold star. Gold star for everyone. A few years ago, we were doing prep for DEF CON for the contest area. We were running Hack Fortress. This is a contest we run out in DEF CON. And the contest organizers told us, hey, we need to know who's bringing what gear, so please log into Facebook and tell us on this thread when you're showing up and what gear you're bringing. I'm like, what? Wait, what? We're at DEF CON and you want me to log into Facebook to do something? No, that is not a thing. And I had to anyway, because they're like, well, we won't let you in then. Oh, Christ. So I caved. I don't use Facebook on a regular basis, but I did it. Now they're like, oh, it's okay, we just use Google Docs, so we don't use Facebook. Google's job is to get all your information, period. You can slag on Apple all you like. I'm totally cool with that. But Tim Cook got up on stage the other day and was basically like, I don't care who you are. We don't even want to know. That's not how we make our money. We sell you expensive gadgets and service plans and music. And that's it. I don't care about anything else. What does Google sell you? Nothing. How do they make the money? You are the product. And you can say, oh, that's not really true. Bullshit. It's true. Look at the model. When you buy an Android phone, I buy a Samsung Galaxy, whatever, what financial gain, immediate, direct financial gain does Google get from the purchase of that phone? Zero. Nothing. When you buy an iPhone, what does Apple get? All the money. That's actually an infinite gap for those that can do math. I had a divide by zero problem, right? Apple gets infinitely more than Google does. So when you sit there all smug as a hacker going, well, I use Android, shut up. Like, it's unbelievable. All right. That was bad. I shouldn't have gone there. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks. Please put that on YouTube. That would be great for anyone. And maybe a Vine of it. That'd be cool, too. And so what's the response? Oh, OPSEC. First of all, most of us don't know what good OPSEC looks like. Nor do we care to do it because we live in America and no one's checking us out, so I don't need OPSEC. That was me like doing a Southern California thing. It really didn't work. It didn't land, thanks. It needed help. Yeah, stick to Alaska, thanks. Oh, there's Russia. Softball. So the problem is, while OPSEC is important, it affects just you. It's like you protecting yourself, and that's not really everything we need to worry about. We need to develop a paranoia in our own technologies, right? And so I take Nest as an example. Again, Nest, owned by Google, and you do pay for it at least this time. They don't just give you Nest. Imagine when you got home, it would be like, hey, what's up? I noticed you're home. I told Google that you got back. I just turned your AC on now, and I'll give you some advertisements later for an air conditioning company because it doesn't seem to be working right. Nothing to worry about, though. I'm just your thermostat. You know, what possible threat could I pose to your personal privacy? Right, anyway, it doesn't do that. It just sits quietly and does that. It doesn't actually inform you of these things, right? I say this euphemistically as if this wasn't actually happening, but this is what occurs, and Google benefits, and the average consumer has no clue that their thermostat is spying on them all the time. So what's interesting are people like OTR actually says, like, this is a, secure chat capability, and they say, what do we see? We see timestamps, destinations, and all that. We don't see the message content. Boom, very clear English. This is what we see when you send text messages through us, right? What is Gtalk or whatever? What's the Google equivalent? Hangouts. G+, there's like a million different ways to communicate in Google, right? Which ways are secure? I don't know. Which ways don't read them? Probably all of them get read by Google at some point, but they don't actually read them. They just read them for keywords so they can sell you ads. That doesn't qualify as reading. That's more skimming, I guess. I'm going to get in trouble. Okay. So the challenge is I see a lot of people thinking, well, you just do better OPSEC and then whatever. No, you can't treat 2015 like it's 1995. We have lost all control. Right? If you want to be a productive member of this society, you use social networking, period. You're on Twitter, you're on Facebook, you're on whatever the hell it is at some level. And you have to accept that. And you have to find ways to protect yourself, your enterprise, and the products that you make in the privacy world that we live in 2015, and stop pretending that we can reinvent ourselves as space rogue, because we can't go back in time and have a handle on an IRC channel and preserve it through all the variations. Because we've already used our real name with Facebook. We've already used our real name with Google. We're already been outed. Our credit card is tied to our phone. People know where we are at all time. Remember back when they used to have to track criminals by their credit card usage? And it'd be like days behind? And now they're like, he's right there in the car in the passenger seat. They know where you are all the time. Like, hey, they can track your phone. Credit card isn't even required anymore. I know where your phone is. You have to accept this. And so I would encourage you, as you're moving out of here, I'm prophetic like this. Not pathetic. Yeah, go Yoda, yeah. Trust me, I know how much time I can fill. Like, I've been doing this long enough. So really, the edginess, the paranoia, wherever the first point was there, I should ask the governor of Texas. Aha, that was some weird political humor. Okay, anyway. Anyway, I would encourage you, in general, don't try to redefine today in the terms that we knew the community 20 years ago, but do recognize that we have lost a lot of things that we cared about. We lost the altruism, we lost the paranoia, we've lost the edginess, and we need to fight to at least get back the parts of that that are important and maintain it in our day-to-day lives. We're never going to go back in time. That's, with all due respect, the Republican dream is to go back to the 50s and have everything be like it was. You know, it's just, no, it's never going to be like that, right? Like, the world's different. We need to accept it as a hacker community and find a way to move forward. Anyway, before I go slagging on Republicans or something stupid like that, I'm going to wrap it up. So it's 4 o'clock, and thanks very much.